She stood in white lace beside the man who shot her brother, silent, unflinching, her hand resting calmly on the sheriff's arm. The town watched in stunned disbelief as she said, "I do," without a tremor. No tears, no fury, just calculation behind her eyes. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The desert hadn't forgotten. It hung over Dry Creek like a grudge, tight-lipped, sunburned, unwilling to let the wind carry anything away. Every creak of the wooden boardwalk seemed louder since Eli Thompson's blood dried behind the saloon. And though no one dared say it aloud, the town breathed quieter now, like even their whispers might draw the wrong kind of attention. Clay Madden wore that quiet like a crown. He still swaggered, boots polished, holster shining, the kind of man who tipped his hat only when someone important passed. But there was a twitch in his jaw now, a momentary flinch in his eyes when someone mentioned the Thompson name. Grace had never said a word to contradict him, never raised her voice in protest. And yet, somehow, her silence bore more weight than a gunshot. She hadn't worn mourning for long, a week, maybe 2. Then the veil came off, and she went back to sewing dresses and mending torn boots like nothing had fractured. The preacher's wife whispered that grief must have broken something in her mind, but those who looked close saw the calculation in her silence, the way her eyes, dark and unmoving, scanned a room like a surgeon deciding where to cut. Clay started visiting the Thompson place in the evenings, not loudly, not openly, just a rider approaching slow as dusk, boots heavy on her porch. Folks noticed, of course. Grace would answer the door in her plain cotton dress, hair pulled back, mouth unreadable. They said she never invited him in. But she didn't turn him away either. And then came the wedding. No notice, no bands, just a white dress she stitched herself, clean and sharp as a blade. Her veil was ivory lace, her gloves buttoned to the wrist, and her face was carved from quiet stone. When Clay took her hand in front of the church, the crowd shifted uneasily, like the floor might crack. No one cheered, no one objected. The preacher's voice faltered once, but Grace's didn't. Her "I do" was as steady as a funeral bell. Afterward, when they walked back down Main Street together, his hand resting over hers, her chin lifted, no one dared meet her eyes. Because deep down, they all felt it. This wasn't forgiveness. It was something slower, sharper, and still loading the chamber. The house on Quarry Street was quiet in the way graveyards are quiet, orderly, clean, and cold beneath the surface. Clay Madden had once imagined a marriage full of warmth and praise, of home-cooked biscuits and laughter. What he got instead was a woman carved from stillness. Grace rose before dawn every morning without complaint or sound. She lit the stove, boiled water, swept the porch. The curtains were always drawn straight, the silver polished, the floors scrubbed until the wood blurred with light. But no matter how bright the room, it never felt warm. She never hummed, never sighed. Her steps made no noise. She moved through the house like breath through a crypt. Clay would watch her sometimes, just long enough to forget to blink. She'd be peeling apples in the kitchen, hands moving like a machine, eyes locked somewhere just over his shoulder. Not out the window. Not on him. Just through. Like she was waiting for something to step in from a place only she could see. He tried to tease her once, told a joke he'd heard from the deputy about a drunk and a mule. Grace smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. She laid down his plate, perfectly centered on the cloth, and returned to the stove. No laugh, no comment, just that faint curve of the lips that felt more like a shiver than a grin. At night, Clay lay beside her with one arm draped across her waist like he was trying to claim her. Her body was neither warm nor cold, just still. He'd fall asleep with the scent of her hair in his nose and the question in his chest. What is she thinking? Sometimes he woke in the pitch black to find her eyes wide open beside him, staring up into the rafters. She never moved, never blinked, just stared, as if each beam held some pattern she was memorizing. Once, when he asked her if something was wrong, she turned to him so slowly it made his skin crawl. Her voice was soft, kind even. "Go back to sleep, Clay," she whispered. "It's not your night to worry." He didn't ask what she meant, didn't want to know. Because the scariest part wasn't that she hated him. It was that she hadn't decided yet if he was worth the trouble. The first crack came not with thunder, but a whisper. The barkeep, Wendell Hayes, who never looked a man square unless pouring him whiskey, muttered something to Grace one morning as she passed through town. It was quiet, casual even. "Your brother left something with me," he said, eyes flicking over his shoulder like the walls had ears. "Didn't know what it was till after." She didn't blink, just waited. He reached beneath the bar and handed her a torn scrap of cloth wrapped around something stiff and rectangular. Inside, a single page. Names, dates, payments. The corner bore the crude outline of Dry Creek's southern lots and the sheriff's initials in a hand too sharp to deny. Grace didn't speak. She folded the paper, tucked it into her dress, and walked out with the same even gait she'd had walking down the church aisle in white. That night, she crawled under the floorboards of Eli's room. The dust was thick, the wood dry and groaning. Her fingers found splinters and spiders and finally, something flat. Wedged between joists, wrapped in waxed cloth. A ledger. The kind of book that didn't just record theft, but mapped its heartbeat. She opened it by lamplight, alone. Each page bled truth. Eli's handwriting, columns of names, ranchers, merchants, even the preacher's son, and Clay Madden's name more than once. Payments circled, land deeds reassigned, dates that traced up to the week before the bullet. Grace stared at the ink until it blurred, not from tears. She didn't have those anymore, but from rage cooled so long it had calcified into something clearer than fury. Understanding. Clay hadn't shot Eli in a scuffle. He had executed him. The next day, Grace cooked stew and set the table for 3. Clay returned dusty from his rounds, a little drunk on pride and rye. She greeted him with a kiss to the cheek and a smile as hollow as a church bell at midnight. Then she welcomed Judge Thorne at the gate with biscuits and sweet tea, like she was any other respectable wife in a respectable house. They talked about livestock and rainfall. Clay told a story that made the judge laugh until he coughed. And while the men drank whiskey in the parlor, Grace stepped outside, past the stables, and tucked the ledger into the judge's saddlebags beneath his riding cloak. She didn't wait to see if he found it. Didn't need to. By dawn, the knock on the door wasn't Clay's. And when they dragged him out, red-faced and sputtering, he looked to her like a man betrayed by a ghost. "You married me just to—" She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she already had. The days rolled on like dust across the plains, silent, slow, inevitable. Dry Creek never forgot, but it tried to soften its memory, to rub the edges off what had happened like time does to old wood. The people who once averted their eyes from Grace Thompson now nodded politely, with downcast glances and quiet guilt. No one dared speak Clay Madden's name in front of her, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the wound that never scabbed over. Grace kept to herself, living alone in the house Clay had built, a modest square of timber and shadow that no longer held a man's voice. She swept the porch each morning with steady strokes, the way Eli used to before supper. pushing dust down the steps, not because it mattered, but because it kept the rhythm of something lost. She repaired her own roof, chopped her own kindling, fixed her own tea. The rocking chair creaked under her slight frame in the evenings as she watched the horizon bleed orange behind the hills. There were rumors, as there always are, that she'd gone cold inside, that she'd married a man just to break him, that she lit a candle every night with no wick, just to feel the darkness press in. But Grace never fed rumors. She gave them nothing to chew on. Her face stayed still, her voice low. She was polite, efficient, and untouchable. The judge never wrote. The marshals never returned. And Clay rotted behind limestone and rust 100 miles east. No trial could cut him deeper than the silence she left him with. He sat day after day beneath the cracked window of his cell, badge polished to a dull glow and left on the cot like a keepsake no one claimed. The guards said he'd talk to the walls sometimes. Asked what she meant by marrying him, asked why she kissed him with eyes that never closed. But Grace wasn't listening. She was placing fresh wildflowers, bluebells and yarrow, on a grave marked simply Eli Thompson, brother. She never lingered, never wept, just placed them, adjusted the stems, and stood a while in stillness. Once, the new sheriff saw her lips move. He thought she might be praying, but he was wrong. She was speaking a name, not Clay's, and not her own. Just Eli's. Soft as breath, sharp as a final word, and the wind took it like it knew where to carry it next.